Hello and welcome everybody to the Beacon of Light podcast this evening. We are so excited to have Miss Laura Moseley, and with her coming here tonight, what's kind of a pre-start for our great domestic violence awareness conferences and everything that's going to be happening. So her story that she's going to share with us tonight is going to be great. But before we talk to her, let's jump into this. I'm April Tribe Juke. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. I believe we are all made with light, and light is hope. This podcast brings authors who write stories of hope to all of you. Your journey to be inspired and amplified by these stories starts now. And we are back. Welcome, Miss Laura Moseley. We are so happy to have you here. And as you can see scrolling on the ticker underneath there, she is a contributor to the book that is God Says. And she'll discuss the story that is in there and then some other things that she has as a writer and as a blogger and all of these great things that she puts together for so many great people. So, Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me, April. I really appreciate that. I am, again, Laura Moseley. I am from Indiana. And I survived over 23 years of sexual and domestic abuse. What I currently do, I'm a single mom of 3 children and 1 grandbaby. And I work for a federal social services organization and am a DV advocate as well.
So what is your best role as a DV advocate? Like, what is something that you would face and do to kind of explain to our audience?
Well, I do work for a federal social services organization. A lot of times I'm the customer service face of that organization. And sometimes I get people that are in active domestic abuse. So one of the things that I have to do is, of course, answer their questions, but I need to know if they're safe. And I've had women, call and ask things and are very, I guess, vague. And then I kind of have to read between the lines. I've had an elderly person call and say she was in current abuse. They weren't letting her talk about her benefits and things like that. So I have to be very, I guess, privy or sensitive to that type of situation. So I know how to act.
Yes, the action is something that's really, really important because they've sought out and they're looking for help. And like you said, depending on who's in the room or their ability to say as much as they can, you do have to become that detective to try to figure out everything that might be happening. And so good for you because it's tough. It's a tough situation, but is there hope?
Absolutely. I think that more people need to, be trauma aware and be able to ask these questions, because some of the other customer service people don't know to ask these questions. And it's important, because if I were still in active abuse and I was calling for help, I would want somebody to be intuitive and tune in on what I was saying and try and help me if at all possible, without compromising my safety.
Right. And that compromise, that's something that can be really challenging because I've always said that the one that is in abuse is the only one who knows when it is time to go. They know that narrow window, and sometimes it can pop up as a surprise. Sometimes it's very well planned. But if you don't have a plan, usually those first reaches start something, but then they usually end up going back. But it is a start, and the momentum can continue forward. So share with us about your story that you wrote for God Says.
Well, I'm going to start off by saying when I was in active abuse, I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing, and my abuser never let me do that. He put a stop to it pretty quickly. So I'm delighted to be able to write. I was a collaborative author on God Says I'm Battle Scar Free, and it's the 7th edition. There were 6 other volumes beforehand. And my story is called My Story of Pain and Purpose. It's all about what I survived. Like I said, 23 plus years of domestic abuse, married to the same man. I was married to him for a total of 26 before the divorce was final. And we have 3
Wow.
children together. So that made it interesting because, I suffered intimate partner abuse. Of course, he did somewhat abuse my children as well, unfortunately. And, so we have a lot that we're still trying to get over.
Right. And working through that is something that's really challenging. So I have a friend here who's popped on tonight, Mr. Michael. John Michael, you are so awesome. He says some trauma helpers are taught not to be empathetic and to check off items on a list as quickly as possible. We need to take the time to really hear the survivor. How do you respond to that?
I agree, John, because if you can't get that survivor to trust you, they are not going to open up any further, and they're not going to feel like you might be able to assist them as they'd hoped. So, I'm very empathetic when I talk to people. I've been there.
That's right. That heart of empathy really connects to try to help us go through those things. So in your active writing now, where before it was absolutely stopped, you couldn't write, how did you get through that?
Well, I tried to even just do a journal, but he wanted to read my journal and read my personal thoughts. So basically, I did keep an online journal in case I needed to report anything, just kind of documenting what was going on as I could safely. And I, I would, he would really only let me read, but only for short periods of time. So it was mind numbing. I had to kind of numb myself to, get through, that long period of not being able to write. And what put a stop to it was I was a part-time reporter for an arts newspaper that we have in my town. And I was very good at it. And I took pictures for it also. And I got paid just a little tiny bit. And I got to interview people and write. And it was great. I enjoyed the heck out of it. But he didn't like that I was enjoying that. And I was taking time away from my family, which really wasn't all that much time. But
Right. But he wanted that focus and the control. And so you
exactly.
share parts of that story within this book you contributed to of God Says. Is that right?
Yes. And I'm
Wow.
also writing a couple more other collaborative things. I'm writing one about women's mental health awareness. Um, and I'm trying to write on a book on how to stop being a victim, not necessarily of abuse, but just a victim, period. So I'm trying to write that one on my own. So we'll
That's
see how
right.
that works out.
Yes, yes. So John has the question and he said, "Did you feel trapped?"
Oh, yeah, I did. And you get this hopeless feeling. I guess the best way I can describe it is I had to kind of numb myself because it seemed very hopeless. And if I was numb, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel happiness, sadness. I just was numb. And I got to the point where I was used to that feeling.
And in that feeling, when we start to get used to that, we really are actually getting further and further away from our health, from could be physical, our mental, our spiritual health really starts to decline because you are either in progressive movements or regressive movements. And when something like this, our coping mechanism of detaching and numbing, it's it is a survival skill, but life was not meant to survive. It was meant to thrive. So now that you
Exactly.
have your divorce final and you can start writing again, was it like a floodgate that opened up? What happened?
It's funny because if anybody's ever hunted or trapped animals, as far as for hunting, if you go to let them go, they just pause like, I don't know what to do. And I was there for a moment. So I started writing down ideas of what I'd like to do as far as rediscovering me. And one of the things I wanted to rediscover, I wanted to revisit writing. Unfortunately, he threatened the poor editor in chief of that newspaper, that arts newspaper. So I wasn't able to do that again, unfortunately. But I started thinking about different things. I've been writing different articles for different periodicals like the domestic violence magazines. I've written a few for some British magazines. They're pretty interesting. The British magazines are geared towards women, And I've really been enjoying that, and speaking on podcasts and talking in my community. So, that kind of, I think writing and speaking kind of go together, you know. So I wanted to kind of start opening the floodgates, because there for a while I felt like I wasn't feeling anything. And then it's funny because my advocate said, one of these days it's just going to like rip right wide open, and you're going to start being emotional and feeling. And I just thought, well, okay, if it does, it happens, it does. And she was right, it did. So I used all of that pent up emotion to write in journals, write in my gratitude journal, start writing down ideas of things I'd like to write. And I came up with the concept of writing a blog specifically on this side of abuse, on the survivor side of abuse, on getting out and what I still struggle with, and resources and things of that nature. And I've gotten a lot of positive response from that.
That's awesome. And in those positive response, it's great to see that the experience, even though the suffering happened, now can turn to become a positivity and something to help with. So John Michael, he has something really interesting to say a little bit here. Um, that he himself is a male survivor of different types of sexual abuse. And he just little brag here. He's an amazing man, and he was an Olympic diver, and like,
Wow.
yeah, incredible amounts of all these, I mean, awards and, competition wins and all these things, but there was a huge price to pay with that. And unfortunately it had to do with coaching and the abuse that happened there. So as a male survivor, do you get many phone calls or any like touch points with that in the work that you do?
I've had a few gentlemen approach me talking about, how they were abused by former spouses. Um, and they'll tell me, and we'll talk about it. And, you have to be empathetic, and no judgment in any situation, whether it's male or female. And I just listen. And, they both told me they felt incredibly better, that they were talking to somebody that could understand and could sympathize, but they just really weren't okay with sharing their story, which was sad. I feel like men are stigmatized about sharing their story, because men are supposed to be so strong, and they're normally the abusers. And when you're abused, that makes you weak. And I don't think that at all. Um, this is something we're going to have to approach with the different types of relationship, the LGBTQ plus community type relationships. Victims aren't always female, and abusers aren't always male. So, law enforcement's going to have to learn how to identify, the victim and the aggressor.
Right. And it comes into a whole bunch of interesting complexities. So with all of that, with the numbing that happened, did you have something within your mind that kept you going? Was there something, a positive, positive voice, or was it this negative self-talk that when he would put you down, your mind would, yeah, I guess I am like that? Or like, how did your mental game work for you?
Well, I was, after everything was done for the evening, and children were fed, and things were taken care of, I could read for a little bit. A lot of times I'd read my Bible. I would read things written by women, that, powerful women, poetry, things like that, just to kind of keep myself, that little tiny pilot light inside me, going. So that's really all I can attribute it to right now. Like I said, I wasn't allowed to write. Um, Anytime I had an interest or a hobby, he kind of squashed it. I did cross stitch for a while. I won awards for it. I made them as gifts. And then, that was taking up too much time. So that had to stop.
Wow. Really, really interesting. His focus and energy all about the time.
Hmm.
It's really, really interesting. So, the idea, John Michael says, many people do not understand how we numb ourselves in order to survive. And well, all these things were being taken away from you. You mentioned twice about the numbingness, that
Hmm.
idea of just getting through the next day. And in that abuse, was it witnessed, like, were physical attacks witnessed by your kids? Did it always happen behind closed doors? Like, how did you survive this?
A lot of the attacks were behind closed doors. I mean, there were usually very loud verbal arguments. Of course, that's not something I wanted to do in front of my children, but they did hear it. I mean, the walls are thin, and sometimes he would be upset with them, and I'd have to intervene. And later on, that meant I would be subject to physical punishment for getting in the way. I mean, it just varied because, he was just unhappy or wanted total control at all times. And I don't know how somebody, even a type A personality, can have total control at all times. So you have to sometimes let life happen. And he just wasn't about that. And wanted to keep, his persona as the nice, funny, friendly guy, when we were out, but when we were at home, there was no holds barred.
Mm, yes, that two-sided, two-masked kind of a face. I
Absolutely.
described a lot about abuse as you're either a hunter, somebody who goes out and looks for that person that will match and fit their needs of full control,
Hmm.
or they are like a caged animal. And I think that those are less, but the, nonetheless, the abuse is the same. And the idea of what happens behind closed doors or in front of others, it is still never okay. So John says, it amazes me how much time and energy your ex spent to control you. My heart breaks for your story, but I'm so impressed of how you have turned things around to help others.
Thank
Thank
you. I
you,
appreciate
John.
that. Yeah, absolutely. I, it's a funny story. I mean, not my story of abuse. It's not, no abuse story is funny, but there was another lady in my town with the name of Laura also. When my final episode of abuse was going on and we had to start getting involved with courts and things, her husband had killed her. The judge could not hold him. She did absolutely everything I did, protective orders, things like that, notifying the police when he violated, and he ended up killing her. And I was afraid I was going to die as well. Again, we had the same judge. I didn't know, what was going to go on. And it gets to be a very, very scary thing, wondering if you're going to die. And I guess I have a little bit of survivor's guilt that she passed away and I got to live, because the day prior to our final incident, he shot at me with a gun, a 9mm gun, and he missed me, thankfully. But, it's through the grace of God that I lived. But if I got to live, then he's still here for a reason. And I feel like that's become kind of my purpose inadvertently, to protect others, because nobody gets to have dominion over somebody, and nobody has the right to bully another person. It's just not fair. And I agree. I thought he spent an awful lot of time controlling what I looked like, how I did my makeup, how I dressed, just every aspect, almost like I was a Barbie doll. And it got to be very, very annoying. So I like who I am. I like that I'm an individual and I get to do what I want to do now instead of being dictated to. So it makes it really, really awesome. There's no
Yes.
other word for it.
There is a sense of this freedom where you it's almost a rediscovery. Like, you knew about your writing, and so it was just kind of on this pause, and the explosion and the emotions and connections came back. For others, maybe they don't know that they have a hidden gift or talent, and when they are finally free to start exploring that, and they leave their victimhood and their survival and start to thrive, it is a burst of light that really does shine for miles and miles, and the impact for other people is really incredible, and their skills, gifts, and talents just start to come out, and it is just amazing to watch the women do this. And it's kind of a cyclic type of experience that they will start, and as kind of as I describe it, they start to share their story at first, which is kind of in that victim role, and then they share it again and it's more of a survivor role. Then they share it again and it starts to thrive. And usually by this fourth or fifth experience or telling, they become a victor.
Mhm.
And those progresses in the journey are incredible. And also as warning, even all of us who have done this escaping, the weakness to return to victimhood can happen. But as we recognize and notice it more and more, we usually don't stay there for very long. Could be just mere seconds and think, wait a minute, am I using my victim voice, or whoa, that's not what I really am. And it's hard because the habits, especially, I mean, you said 23 years, and by the time the divorce was finalized, 26 years. It's
Mhm.
a long time to, over half your life, to learn how to just survive and now get this freedom. Like you said, as the cage went up, it's like, uh,
I don't know what to do.
okay, I don't know what to do. Yeah, there's that experience, but real health and then this journey allows us to really, make the progress forward, and I think it is powerful. We have another Facebook user today that says, Laura, our stories seem to be very similar. To break free from those chains which come with a long journey of self-discovery. So how do your children see you now?
Um, it's a mixed bag. In the beginning, they were very supportive, and they are now, but um, now they're kind of, I guess, more comfortable with freedom. And I do see some tendencies that their dad had in them. And when I bring that up, I'm not popular at that point. Um, we're kind of reestablishing how to communicate with one another. Two of my children are adults. The other one's about to turn 16 this week. And, we're all learning how to communicate as adults. Before it was, I'm the mom, they're the kids, but now we're all our own adults and trying to heal and communicate and things like that. So we're just trying to reestablish, I think, even 5 years later.
Yeah, the reestablishment, and it's an establishment of communication which will change and keep evolving, and there will be times of intense blame, I have to say, because I also have adult children now that experienced awful things, and the the blame sometimes happens, but there's also this hope with it, and so that's I think what makes anything really possible. It really does. And yeah, this is true. We don't all heal and sync together, although that would
That
be
would be
great.
great.
It would be
Absolutely.
great. It would be great. So another question here is, did your kids end up resenting you for being in the situation and not leaving sooner?
I think there was some anger there. There still kind of is a little bit, I think, but the anger is that I stayed too long and that he wasn't, a good dad or a real dad to them, and just a biological one. So I feel like they suffer that sense of loss. And I kind of suffer it too. That's why I stayed so long. I didn't want them to be coming from a broken home. I thought, I could fix it or I could fix me and it would all be better. And that's just definitely not how that works.
Yeah, right. Because it does take the two to come together to make a union. And that whole idea of togetherness would really be amazing. And as we start these journeys, usually it's with that hope, it's with that, same team, same dream idea.
Hmm.
And whether the situation pops up that we've never really noticed, or as we get to know more and more, we see where the red flags were probably planted all along the way, and somehow we miss them. And so it is a challenge because I know there is blame that happens, but really we can get through this. And so in your story that you wrote about God Says, why were you asked to be a contributor to that book?
I mean, there was a call for authors that had, suffered domestic abuse, some sort of domestic abuse, and a story of strength and courage. And I thought, well, I'll write it and see how it does. And she asked me to, if she could include it in the book. And I was really excited about that. And flattered and amazed, I guess. So I'm just still in awe of something like that, and finding, collaborations where I can, be myself and write about my perspective of the topic, like the women's mental health anthology that I'm writing in, you know, suffering domestic abuse. There's some mental health issues that follow that. I know I have complex PTSD from being in it so long, and anxiety and depression. And, those are things that I still wrestle with today, 5 years later. And, I think that that's something people need to be aware of, that maybe that they didn't start off life with that mental issue, but we're dealing with them now. That's the fallout from having to deal with that so much abuse. So, and then that's perfectly normal, and people need to recognize that, I think.
That's right. That idea of like it is part of the healing, and the freedom, the physical freedom is a huge step. But then the freedom of your mind, the freedom of the healing it's a lifetime. And thankfully, as the journey progresses, it it seems to really have, I would say, longer strides before a next episode happens, which is positive, right? That's something to see. Wow, I'm so much further than I was, and you just have that retrospect to look back and to see. And if you are writers out there, you'll really see it within your writing. You'll see the
Hmm.
anger. You'll see what the emotions are that's fueling that, and it's really something powerful. Um, we have someone that says, in retrospect, I should have left many years ago. That guilt's something that I work through often. Having open, honest conversation with my children has helped me move through that guilt. Yeah, way to go. Congratulations with that.
Absolutely. And I think it's good. We still have to have incremental conversations sometimes. Sometimes one person gets so heated that we have to abandon that conversation and revisit it later, because it's just too emotional for that person. It could be one of my kids, it could be myself. I know, like I said, occasionally I see tendencies come out in my children that I've seen in my ex-abuser. I mean, that's still their dad. And I have to mention that to them. I call it to their attention and say, look, that you're sounding a lot like your dad, which is making my anxiety go up. So, I really wish you would stop, or at least recognize that that's going on. And of course, a lot of times they get defensive, and it seems like a counterproductive conversation until a day or two later when they come back to me and say, I see that now. I didn't before. But, when they keep going back to it, they were raised from the time that they were born in abuse. And I deal with the guilt of my own for staying so long. I beat myself up on that. But my mother, who just passed away, one of the last conversations I had with her, she said, "You got out when you were safe to do that. So don't feel guilty about that. You tried. You were all in." And she's right. She and part of this conversation that we had was she was just having a hard time forgiving him because she knew she was dying. She had ovarian cancer, and she was just talking to me about, I don't know how to forgive him. And I had to talk about, well, I'm not ever going to get an apology. So I came to that terms with that a long time ago, but I had to forgive him. And, not that it wasn't a big deal, it was a big deal, but I had to forgive and move forward, because my dad always taught us that those who anger you own you. And I wasn't going to be owned by him. He wasn't worth that. Um, so hopefully that brought her some peace. I hope she was able to resolve that before she passed away, because she started getting to where she couldn't talk anymore. She slept more and more. So I don't know. I just pray that she did.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you so much for sharing that story, because the forgiveness is really part of that victory, because like you said, it frees us to move forward. And we if we sit and wait, like you said, for the apology in return,
I'll never get
that's
it.
that's not how forgiveness works. You are releasing the shame and the guilt that all of was tied up with there. So now you're free to move forward. And I think more perspectives and more, the more we talk about that, the freer everyone becomes. So we're coming down to the end of our evening tonight. So thank you everybody for popping in here and making great conversations and contributions to this wonderful conversation. Again, go ahead and grab that book. It says God Says, and look for her chapter that says Laura Moseley. And she's also check out for her blog. There's a email address that we have. We're scrolling down here, and she can tell you what the blog title is so that you can get to that. And you want to share that with them?
Sure. I named my blog the DV Walking Wounded, DV for domestic violence. Walking Wounded often refers to veterans, and I didn't want to disrespect any veterans. So it's called dvwalkingwounded.me, and I chose the .me because it happened to me. And I want people to kind of remember that and think, oh, yeah, me too. And it's a blog. I try to write on it every day. And I also like guest posts. I like guest posting on other blogs. I also have an inspirational Facebook page called the same thing, DV Walking Wounded. And you can join that as well. And I hope that, if you don't get anything out of my blog, or if you do, that's great. But please share with somebody you feel like might need that information.
Right. And in that information sharing, this is the perfect way to share forward. I wanted to share a little bit about our announcement about our great we have a domestic violence conference coming up. And so I wanted to share this little piece right here. You guys can see it here. This is our announcement of the 3rd annual Unite in Light Domestic Violence Conference. And you can see down here are a few of our speakers. We will have Miss Andrea, Keely, Rachel, Donna, Estella, and I have, if I can punch the right button, I have a panel this year, which I'm really excited about men making the difference. Because the perspective of what we want to do for any of this really to heal is we have to start asking the hard questions about what is happening to our boys, that as they are raised, this becomes a normal, this becomes fine to abuse or control other people. What events did they have in their own life that they suffered from? Is it just a family tradition to happen this way? What's going on? Because it seems like there's more and more. I mean, when 1 in 4 are suffering in the United States, why? There must be something happening to our men. And so the conversation, I'm really excited to kind of get their perspectives and how they support with the women that are the dominant, I would say, victim in domestic violence, even though we know it happens on the other side. So we have to ask ourselves why. So everyone come to this. It's going to be in October every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. We will meet with all the speakers, and I'm really excited to bring this to you. And thank you, Laura, for allowing me to kind of share all of that.
No problem.
And so we are excited about everything. Thank you again. And come to the conference, go to her blog, join us, and let's together change the face of this, ask the hard questions, and get on that healing journey so that the change can happen for all. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.